No.
So we are more than halfway through June. I've only read 2 books so far. One is a retelling of J.M. Barrie's classic Peter Pan, and the other is Kalyn Josephson's debut novel Stormcrow. But before we proceed, I'd like to thank everyone who's visited my channel so far. It's been overwhelming. And thank you for liking, subscribing, and commenting, and So anyway, so the first book is Colleen Oak's Wendy Darling Volume 1 Stars. This is a retelling of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, which is a dark take on the classic. Disclaimer though, I have not read the original Peter Pan, and my only reference is the Disney movie. So there's that. So the story starts in London, but later on transitions to Neverland, where most of the story happens. It's told in third person from the point of view of Wendy, and it doesn't really changes, or it doesn't really move from one character to the other. So it's purely just Wendy's point of view. So if you like that kind of storytelling, then you might enjoy this book. So the pacing of this book is rather slow, and it's not really a page turner until the last third of the book, but it doesn't mean that it's boring. It's just that the author takes her time in revealing what happens. But there's already hints here and there. But yeah, it's slow. So if you don't like slow kind of storytelling, then you might not like this book. I mean, you have to consider it's Peter Pan, and there's the Lost Boys, and I expected a lot of action just from that idea alone, but yeah, it still felt slow for me. But not negatively so. So most of the major characters from the original are present, namely Peter Pan, of course, and Wendy, her brothers, the Lost Boys, Hook, Tinkerbell. But there are minor characters which I wish were present, but they never really appeared. Instead, we are given a lot of new characters in the form of the Lost Boys. Unfortunately, I felt a lack of development for them. They were introduced early on in the book, and then in the later half of the book, there was one lost boy in particular that I thought would matter by the ending, but he disappeared with no trace. And supposedly there is sort of representation in this book in the form of the Lost Boys, but it didn't really add to the story. Well, it initially felt like it would add to the story, but nothing really came out of it. Like, it didn't really matter, if you understand what I mean. Say, for example, one of the Lost Boys mentioned has Asian features. So, that's it. Nothing came out of it. Is Asian, okay. And then we have another Lost Boy who is of African American features, but that's it. Okay, it didn't add to the story. I mean, I wish there was more that happened aside from just introducing them to be, okay, here's representation of this one, here's a representation of that one, and then okay, nothing happens to them. So I struggle to think of things I like about this book, aside from it being a dark retelling. Yeah, I don't know. What do I like about this book? The characters, I do have a lot of thoughts on things I didn't like, though. For example, author has a thing for Peter's eyes. He just kept repeating and repeating about his eyes, and I don't. Okay. And then with the characters, there's this guy named Booth. I don't know why his name is Booth. Why is his name Booth? Why Booth? And then we come to the romance. The romance is actually central to the plot. And if I have known from the beginning that that's the driving point of the story, I would have gone in with a different perspective. Because I'm not a romance person. I mean, romance is not on the top of my priority of books to read, but I do enjoy it if I actually mean to read a book that's romance and not romance as a side plot, if you understand what I mean. So my problem with this book started with that. And yeah, it's a romance-driven book. It's how Wendy's character is shaped and progressed throughout the book. Her reaction to Peter, her reaction and attraction to Peter, and how she compares it to someone else in the story. I mean, it's Peter Pan. When I think of Peter Pan, I remember Peter Pan, the Lost Boys, adventure, so I didn't really get it in my head that there's romance, and then I don't know why I didn't even think that Wendy, she's a female teen, and there's Peter Pan, and when the book is centered around Wendy, so why did it not occur to me that of course romance would be central to the plot? Why didn't I think of that? So that was my mistake. But to be fair, the book handles it well. The one thing that this book did good is mental health. I want to talk about it, but it's gonna be a spoiler, so I'll just not say anything. But there's a character there that, well, let's just say there's talk of abuse, there's gaslighting, and there's a representation of an abusive relationship. And I like that part. I really like that part. Because it doesn't romanticizes it. So after all that, I'm giving this book 3 stars. And I'm probably going to sit on it a while longer before writing out my Goodreads review. So the other book I've finished for this month so far is Kalyn Josephson's debut novel Stormcrow, which is Books and Tea Book Club read-along for this month. So Stormcrow is set in this huge fictional world. It felt really big because of how many kingdoms there were, but I can't really gauge how big because the ebook that I have doesn't have a map on it, and I'm not sure if the print versions have a map on it. Well, anyway, it's told in first person view, and it doesn't move from point of views. It stays with the main character, Thea. So Stormcrow has this really interesting premise. There is magic, and instead of self-casting, the magic is channeled through crows. It's not really fully fleshed out in the books, and I think we'll learn more of the mechanics in the second book. Well, anyway, for the most part, the story revolves around kingdom politics, and the story is a lot similar to Throne of Glass, but it's not as over. It's not as. It's a milder version of Throne of Glass or something like that. Well, anyway, What I really like about this book is there's a good representation and handling of mental health. For example, we see a character who finally gets their first kill, and it's not like other books where it's just glossed over and forgotten. We actually see the character struggling with that, how they just killed somebody and how they're coping after it. Notice how some fantasy books where this character has never killed anyone and then they kill someone for the first time, and then it's like, doesn't that affect you? I mean, yeah, they do mention or they talk about it affecting them, how it just felt weird or whatever their reaction to their first kill is, and then it just go poof. But in Stormcrow, it's addressed, and it's not something that just goes away. So the character is slowly struggling with it, and I like how that was addressed. It was really good. In relation to mental health, there isn't just one trauma that the story is revolving around. The other characters also have their own different traumas. I like how it's handled because their traumas aren't just mentioned for the sake of it. Like, okay, let's give this character trauma just to make them more interesting. No, they actually struggle, and we see how they cope with the trauma. Another thing I really like about this book is the casualness of the LGBT representation. For once, it's not about coming out, it's not about getting accepted or figuring themselves out. It just is. So let's take, for example, there's a male character who's married to another male character. There's a female character who's attracted to another female character. And there's no judgment between the characters. There's no judgment, there's no questioning. It just is, and they accept it. And I think this is good representation, especially for younger readers. If they read this and then they see it and go, okay, it's normal. It's not something that you judge. And that's a really cool thing about this book. What I don't like about this book, though, is that there's a lot of plot holes. There were a lot of scenes that I felt like they were cut off. I mean, like, for example, there's this character who's struggling with their ability, and then suddenly in the next scene it's solved. What was the point of struggling with this thing, and if it's just suddenly fixed on the next chapter without much fanfare? Okay. And then there's the villain. Her name is Razzle. I don't know, it doesn't sound villainy. But name aside, the villain Razzle is painted as someone cunning, ruthless, and evil. I get it. I believe she's evil. She's believably evil. Ruthless, but not the cunning. Maybe it's because the story as a whole doesn't have that much layer of plot to it, which I was missing. It's why I'm rating this book 2.5 out of 5. Because I can't help but compare it to Throne of Glass, where there's layers upon layers of plots. And to be fair, this book is shorter. If the main villain is painted as someone who's cunning, who's someone who manipulates others, then I expect there's a lot of layers to the plot, and it's not just this and this equals to this, if you know what I mean. And then there's the problem of gauging the size of the crows. The story talks about crow riders. I expect the crows to be really big, and there's even a part where a baby crow was described to be about 3 feet, so that's big. But the crows we know aren't that big. But yeah, so I expect them to be big. And then there are scenes where the main character is carrying the crow like it's not 3 feet tall, like it's actually regular bird size. I don't know. It's not consistent. For the most part, I did enjoy this book, but it wasn't the kind of book that made me want to keep reading because I can't wait to find out what happens next. It was predictable. I'm fine with predictable books, but this one is just extra predictable to the point where I don't really care much what's gonna happen next or something like that. There wasn't any driving force for me to keep reading. Like, the only reason I'd want to keep going is because I just want to see how it ends. So yeah, there's that. There wasn't any wow factor. There wasn't any point where I got excited to find out more about something, because 2/3 of the book, well, actually about 80 to 90% of the book, what I thought would happen happened, so it diminished the excitement for me. And then there's the problem of every single character in the book has a dead or missing parent. I kept looking for a character that has a complete family, or a character who doesn't have a tragic past. I mean, not everyone has to have a tragic past. So at the end of it all, I did enjoy it, and there were interesting parts. Unfortunately, I'm sticking with my 2.5 out of 5 stars rating, because when it was all over, instead of reminiscing of the things that I did enjoy in the story, all I kept thinking about were the plot holes. I can see a younger me enjoying this though. The younger me who hasn't read that many books that are similar, and the younger me who did enjoy The Throne of Glass. So if you want to read this book, I say go ahead, because it has good representation, it discusses mental health in a good way, and the things that I didn't like were just things that I'm sure others will not even bother to notice. So see you all in the next one, and I hope I'll be able to read a few more books before the month ends.